Communication. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our speakers today and the guests who have assembled. We are just about to begin today's session, Ethical Concerns in Indian Media and the Way to Reform. Now I would request the Registrar of the University, Dr. YSR Murthy, to take over and give a welcome note.
On behalf of the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication and on behalf of the OP Jindal Global University, I want to extend a warm welcome to the panelists Pranjay, Seema and Vinita. Mr. Siddharth is on his way and will join us shortly. We were established in 2009. We started with the law school. Today we have schools devoted to business, international affairs, public policy, liberal arts and humanities. And in 2017, that is this year, the School of Journalism and Communication will start its courses from this August. We have over 2,800 students with 225 faculty members, and these faculty members are recruited from across the world. 20% of the faculty members are international professionals and living in Sonipat and teaching, and they include 4 Rhodes Scholars and people who have degrees from the 50 best institutions of the world. We have been maintaining 1:13 faculty-student ratio, and our university is strongly committed to research, and there are over 50 research centers, and the faculty also been publishing. The School of Journalism and Communication has been, envisaged as India's truly global and multidisciplinary journalism school. They have been organizing seminars and public events on contemporary issues. In December 2016, we organized a seminar on media, governance and journalism, the challenges and implications. And in the same month, we also organized a distinguished public lecture by Rajdeep Sardesai on ethics and professional obligations of journalists. There are many ethical concerns today we come across: paid news, corruption, and sensationalism. Often there are talks of media trial and reputation being harmed through insensitive reporting, and we have a really very distinguished panel to enlighten us on each of these issues. Without much ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Pranjay Guhatapurda. Before he could speak, I would like to briefly introduce him. Mr. Pranjay Guhatapurda is currently editor of the Economic and Political Weekly. His work experience, spanning nearly 4 decades, cuts across different media: print, radio, television and documentary cinema. He's a writer, speaker, anchor, interviewer, teacher and commentator in 3 languages: English, Bangla and Hindi. His main areas of interest are the working of the political economy and the media in India and the world, on which he has authored, co-authored books and directed, produced documentary films. He teaches and speaks on these subjects. He is a regular contributor to publications and websites and frequently appears on the radio and television channels as an anchor as well as an analyst. His recent books are titled Sue the Messenger: How Legal Harassment by Corporates is Shackling the Reportage and Undermining Democracy in India, and Gas Wars, Crony Capitalism and the Ambanis. I now request Mr. Pranjay Guhatapurda to give his address.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. Thank you, Suruchi. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends. And I'm speaking extempore, and I'm sure that the speakers after me will be able to elaborate on many of the points that I will make. And I hope after our presentations we can have a discussion so that you can raise questions and you can ask me, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will be more than willing to answer any questions that you may have. The first thing about the media in India is that the media in India is vast, and there are all kinds of media persons as well. There were, at the last count, over 100,000 publications registered with the Registrar of Newspapers of India. I don't think there's any other country in the world with so many publications. There are hundreds of radio stations. All India Radio is a unique body in terms of the number of languages it broadcasts in, its reach. But we are perhaps the only country in the world which calls itself a democracy, where news and current affairs on the radio is still a monopoly of the government. And this is particularly unusual because whether it be the print medium, whether it be the internet, whether it be television, we have a lot of private players. We have somewhere in the region of about 900 television channels given permission by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to uplink and downlink. About 300 of them claim they are news and current affairs channels. I say claim because what you see on that idiot box, you wonder sometimes whether it's news or current affairs. And of course, nobody really knows how many websites there are. But so the media at one level might appear to reflect the diversity, the heterogeneity, the plurality of this unique country. At the same time, what you see in the media is that a few organizations, a few conglomerates tend to dominate, whether it be the print medium, whether it be television. And we have, for instance, the Times of India, which is the world's most widely circulated English daily newspaper. It's Asia's biggest publisher. 1 out of 2 publications, the daily newspapers sold in this country in the English language is an edition of the Times of India. Today, the Times of India is among the top 3 or 4 newspapers, printed newspapers, which are in circulation. A few years ago, there were about 8 or 10 newspapers, and they were not in the English language, which circulated more than the Times of India. They were in Hindi, of course. We have the Dainik Jagran, we have the Dainik Bhaskar. In Marathi, you have Lokmat. In Malayalam, you have the Malayalam Manorama. In Telugu, you have Inadu. In Tamil, Bangla, Punjabi. So there are these large media groups and large media organizations that dominate the media. And some of them are controlled by big organizations and big corporates. For instance, 2 of the richest men in India, Mr. Mukesh Ambani and Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, they are controlling between them, the companies they control, they account for a very, very substantial chunk of the mass media in this country. Now, obviously, if they are controlling it, that means that these media organizations cannot publish anything which will be critical of them, even if it's truthful. A lot of the media has political affiliations. For instance, the Dainik Jagran, which is the most widely circulated newspaper in India. Its directors, its members belong to the Bharatiya Janata Party. They're members of parliament. So it should not surprise you if the coverage of the Dainik Jagran favors the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is currently the ruling party. In fact, in the run-up to the elections, one of the employees, the senior employees of the organization, actually had to spend time behind bars. So when we talk about ethical concerns in media, there are different kinds of ethical concerns. Some of them are not new, they're very old. Corruption in the media is as old as the media itself. Whether it be journalists accepting some favors or some bribes or a nice meal or a nice holiday or a nice junket to write something favorable, to the kind of money that's spent illegally in the run-up to elections so that people write articles which are favorable towards a particular candidate or to favor a particular political party. Now, we have this whole business of paid news is surreptitious, is underground. There's nothing legal. There's no evidence, there are no checks, there are no receipts. But the whole idea is to influence, the media, so that you, the reader, the listener, the viewer, you cannot distinguish between what is an advertisement and what is supposed to be news, what is supposed to be independently produced, what is supposed to be objective. Now, to some extent, we see this across the world. I mean, it's not unique to India. We see this across the world. And this undermines democracy itself, the process of democracy. I mean, after all, if you didn't have free expression, the right to free expression, you wouldn't call yourself a democracy. Now, people go to one extreme. They said, in a democracy, if the media is expected to hold truth to power, if the media is supposed to play the role of that proverbial fourth estate, to play the role of that adversary, that antagonist, to be critical of those who are in positions of power and authority, to hold them accountable, to ensure greater transparency in society, then that media should have a certain amount of freedom and a certain amount of financial freedom. Now, what we are seeing of late is that a very, very substantial portion of the media has become subservient to those who are in positions of power and authority. Now, to some extent, as I mentioned, it's happening across the world. After the Great Recession since 2008, we see expenditure on advertising in many, many parts of the world and also in India either not going up very quickly or stagnating, or in some cases even coming down. That has a direct impact on the revenue models of mainstream media organizations. And that, in turn, say in a country like India, has made certain media organizations more dependent on the government for advertising support. And when he who pays the piper calls the tune. So that's what happens. So those who pay the money tend to ensure or influence the editorial content, that's what you get to read and what you get to hear and what you get to watch. In this kind of a scenario, how do we move ahead? How do we reform? What is the way forward? At one level, a lot of the media in India believes that self-regulation is the best form of regulation. But what we have in India is a kind of a regulatory anarchy prevailing. It's pretty chaotic because we have a number of organizations, and sometimes these organizations don't work in tandem with each other. But together with the fact that across the world after the Great Recession, what has happened, the big change that has happened, and the way human society has changed in ways which we could never have imagined, is the rise of the internet. Today, the internet is being used by half the population of the planet. In a country like India, maybe 1/3 of the population is using the internet. In China, maybe 50%. If you take the average of the 54 countries of the continent of Africa, maybe that proportion will be lower. If you take North America, that proportion will be in its 90s. There is a digital divide. And even those who are not using the net are getting influenced by the internet. But the internet today not only has changed human society, it's changed the media. Today you carry in the palm of your hand your newspaper, your magazine, your library of books, your radio station, your television channel, and more. Because it's not only a medium of mass communication, it's also a medium of personalized communication. And that has, in a sense, raised a huge number of different sets of ethical concerns. The credibility of that information that is being put out, what is factually correct and what is opinion, and how do we authenticate, verify information? How do we ensure that it's credible? It's one thing to express an opinion, it's another thing to present facts. And that dividing line has often narrowed. Yet we can't do anything without it. Today, there are more users on Facebook than the total population of the People's Republic of China. Soon, in a few years from now, the number of users on Facebook would exceed the combined population of India and China, which is about 40% of the population of the planet. On any given 24-hour cycle, more than 1 billion messages and videos and photographs are being exchanged on WhatsApp. So we can't ignore it. But we also have today a situation, a new set of ethical concerns on the whole issue of what is true, what is not. Post-truth, they're calling it. What is fake news? It can be generated from any part of the world. It can do immense damage. And it does, indeed. And these have raised in India and across the world a new set of concerns. But let me first just highlight 2 or 3 points. Just as one doesn't want to tar everybody with the same brush, there is the media, there is the media. There are journalists and there are journalists. There are very good journalists in this country. They are holding accountable those who are abusing their power. There are journalists who are ensuring that our society is more transparent, that we get to know what's happening. And just as there are journalists who are not that they are journalists only by name. They play the role of stenographers. There are journalists who play the role of advertising agents and public relations officers. And worse, there's one small section of journalists who become criminals. I mean, I can name them for you. There, in recent times, the head of a particular television channel had to spend time behind bars. He was accused of extortion and blackmail. So they are also journalists, and there are other journalists and activists who are using the right to information who have been brutally killed. They don't speak English like me. They don't live in even cities like Delhi or Mumbai like I do. They live in remote areas. They are far more vulnerable. And if you go through a recent report prepared by the Committee for Protection of Journalists, they've listed a large number of journalists who've been brutally killed while trying to perform their professional obligation. So the point that needs to be made is that you can't take a view which is either all black or all white. There are many, many shades of grey. I want to, before I sort of conclude my presentation, because I can go on and on, but I'd rather answer your questions. What's the way forward and what's the way to reform? Let's look ahead a little bit. What used to be called telecommunications and what was broadcasting, there's no difference today. It's all there, as I told you, literally in the palm of your hand. So there is the notions of prime time gone. You can watch any program anywhere, any point of time, if you want to, if it's on YouTube. Now, take a country like India, and I'll list the different regulatory authorities. First, the statutory bodies, and then the self-regulatory bodies. And we have a completely chaotic, anarchic situation. You have, for instance, for cinema, the Central Board of Film Certification, affectionately referred to as the Censor Board. Currently, it's being headed by a propagandist who is close to the Prime Minister. He'll tell you whether demonetization should be mentioned once or twice. He will tell you whether James Bond should kiss for 10 seconds or 18 seconds. That's the Central Board of Film Certification for you. You have a body called the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI. It's a technical and a commercial regulator. It's supposed to regulate telecom, but it's also willy-nilly looking at television channels. It's telling television channels, you've signed an agreement, you can't show advertisements beyond a certain number, in any given hour. And then once they start enforcing that rule, the television companies go to court, and he said, you want to kill us? You want us to shut down? In any case, the media is retrenching people, and they're using demonetization as an excuse, but they're throwing away people. Throwing people out of their jobs. And these are like big newspaper organizations and big media organizations. So you have the TRAI. Then you also have the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. The license, since it issues licenses, it has the right to suspend licenses and or cancel them also. Now sometimes they find somebody has shown something obscene, something that inappropriate. They said, hello, don't do that. And they issue a show cause notice, and he says, bad boy, don't do it again. Be a good boy. And sometimes they'll invoke a rule and go after a particular television channel. Siddharth is here, NDTV. He said, shut down. your broadcast, stop broadcasting for one day. Then you have to go to court, and he said, why are you picking on us? You're supposed to be acting in an anti-national. This is the big thing today. I mean, Seema and others will tell you more about our notions of who's a patriot and who's a traitor in today's India. But so the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting acts in an arbitrary manner. You have two public broadcasters, Doordarshan and All India Radio. I told you we are the only country in the world which calls itself a democracy, where news and current affairs is still a monopoly of the government. But you also find that the INB ministry effectively is controlling in Doordarshan and All India Radio. That the political bosses control it. I mean, it's a farce that the Prasar Bharati Corporation is called quote-unquote autonomous. I mean, in certain respects, we've regressed. We've moved back in time, the way All India Radio and Doordarshan used to be in the 70s, in the mid-70s, during the days of the emergency, where for the first time in the history of this country, we had all our, well, the right to free expression, among other rights, were drastically curtailed, abridged. So we are a new kind of emergency that we see today. That's not all. You have other bodies. I used to be a member for 3 years of a body called the Press Council of India. We prepared a report on paid news, how corruption in the media undermines democracy. The Press Council of India is a quasi-judicial body set up by an act of parliament. It has no powers to punish anybody. It's not even a toothless tiger. You know, a tiger can scare somebody. The Press Council can't even punish anybody. It can say only, as I was telling you, the information, you've done a bad thing, don't do it again. Bad boy, don't do it again. Be a good boy, that kind of thing. And the Press Council of India's powers only is for the print medium. Its writ does not go to the electronic medium. You have something called a CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. Now, sometimes they have to act because there are misleading messages being put out. You know, there was a scare some years ago about students from northeastern India who have to face the kind of discrimination that some of you here have had to face in India in recent times. And there was this scare, and they had to, they wanted to all go back. This was all spread on in the form of messages, on short messages. And then the CERT had to intervene to block those URLs, Universal Resource Locators. But today we are, sometimes the CERT or the Computer Emergency Response Team acts in an utterly stupid manner. There was a particular person by the name of Arindam Chaudhary. He was running a set of educational institutions, and he was unhappy with some people who were publishing some articles about him. And they said, block the following websites. And they ended up blocking the website of the University Grants Commission also. I mean, so it ends up doing pretty ridiculous things. Then you also have self-regulatory bodies like the News Broadcasting Standards Authority, the Advertising Standards Council of India. You know, suddenly, after 40 years of its existence, the Advertising Standards Council of India have woken up to say all these whitening creams, you know, Fair and Ugly cream. You've seen the most popular cosmetic product sold in India, made by Hindustan Unilever, that they might be actually violating some of the guidelines and the norms. Well, you have the News Broadcasting Standards Authority, but these are self-regulatory bodies. If you're not a member of that organization, then you are, you don't need to bother about them. There are other such organizations like that, but they don't have any statutory backing. So what we have today is pretty chaotic. We have a situation where the people in power, they want the media to conform. The kind of pressures that are being put on the media organizations that are trying to be independent and autonomous are many. And it's not a good period, it's not a difficult period. But once again, I believe that there are enough people who do believe in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, which says the freedom of expression is a fundamental right of every citizen. The media derives its freedom from this right. The problem is Article 19.2, which is supposed to impose what are called reasonable restrictions on the right to free expression. The problem is who decides what is reasonable. Is it your local mafia don? Is it your policeman? Or is it the Chief Justice of India? That's where the interpretation of the law and the implementation of the law comes in. So the way forward, I believe, is for a more aware citizenry. You who consume the media, you who read and listen and look at the media, you have to be more aware. You have to become far more aware of what is paid for, what is an advertisement, and what is independently produced, balanced, factually correct information. You have to learn to distinguish between that which is fake and that which is not fake, that which is real. And I do believe, yes, the state has a role, the government has a role, and we have to sort of work together to see how the media can play its role, the role it has to be that fourth estate as a pillar of democracy, because without a free media, you cannot have democracy. A lot of people say you only highlight the bad news. Good news is no news. Bad news is good news. If dog bites man, it's not news. If man bites dog, it becomes news. Unless dog bites Narendra Modi, then it becomes news. So it's like what you want to, at the end of the day, there are watchdogs and there are lapdogs. And there are intelligent guide dogs. Just as there are dogs and dogs, there's the media. But what we are saying is, if you believe in democracy, then you will know that the right to free expression and a free media, you cannot have democracy without it. In all authoritarian societies, in all authoritarian regimes, you only get good news. Okay, you may have a surfeit of bad news sometimes. You may have, as was pointed out by Professor Murthy, exaggeration, sensationalism. But that's the price you pay for freedom. But that freedom, you have to keep fighting for it. And you have to continue to wage a struggle to ensure that you have a media which is truly free, truly independent, and can hold truth to power. Thank you very much for listening to me.
And also highlighting some of the reform measures. I now like to introduce the second speaker, Mr. Seema Mustafa. She's currently the editor-in-chief of The Citizen, a digital newspaper founded by her. Seema Mustafa began her career in journalism with The Pioneer and worked for several other Indian publications, including The Telegraph, Indian Express, and The Asian Age. She was also the resident editor of The Sunday Guardian, a weekly newspaper.
I believe everybody here is not a journalism student, so I think I'll just start by reminding ourselves and telling you that the media, I don't need to say it, but it's an extremely powerful and an amazing profession which we seem to have lost sight of as we moved on all across the world. And to get an idea of how strong we are and could be, is imagine that if when the first tanks, the American tanks, rolled into Iraq, they were not carrying embedded journalists. And they were journalists who were free and there on their own and reporting for all the mainstream agencies and television channels across the truth of what they saw. The situation in the Middle East would be very different. Just as many of you here from the African nations, if the Indian media had seen and had covered the attacks when they began on the Africans in India, particularly a year ago, 2 years ago, and we had realized and we had reported it in the manner that it should have been reported, perhaps what happened to the Nigerians today wouldn't have happened. Because it's the way of how you bring out the truth, how you analyze the truth, how you project the truth, and how the facts are then built by a free and independent media to exert pressure on governments and to make governments realize that the folly or whatever their ways are. So today we are living in times that are obviously very dangerous, not just in India, across the world. They're distorted. And so in these times, propaganda, as Bilja also said, is no longer what you call invisible government. It is actually the government. Propaganda and government is one whole. And the principal roles then of the government is to basically control the media, or as has been written, conquer the media. And the media's sense of the world, the media's ability, or really I should say our inability to separate the truth from the lies. It is really strange that today, when there has been an information revolution across the world, when information and communication has become so easy, and also when the media is so powerful, it is actually very, very weak. Because the power is coming from money and commerce, it is not coming from influence and pressure. And some of you who are journalist students here or media students might know again of one of the most amazing journalists, John Pilger, who I like to quote in all such meetings, from Australia, when he says that today we have war by the media, we have censorship by the media, we have demonology by media, retribution by media, diversion by media, and we are really in the middle of what you can call a surreal assembly, as he puts it, an assembly line of obedient cliches and false assumptions. So media is really being used, and being used very, very cleverly, to build a new reality. We are part of what you can call a personality cult. We promote personalities now, that is from all across the world. We promote and we create a fictitious, factual narrative. Because now we are controlled by the corporate, we're controlled by big money. All the mainstream media, as Paranjoy also pointed out, is in the hands of a few conglomerates. And those in turn have this very unholy nexus with governments and with big multinationals, and with a kind of nexus that you only understand when you're from within, and it is not so visible to those who are from outside. And this is one of the reasons why I want to focus a little bit on censorship by the media, as has been said. Not just everything, but it's like after the emergency in India, we talked about censorship was imposed on us by the government. And after that, the Indian journalists became very, very sensitive about any government control. And whenever there was a bill brought in by the states, which was even seen remotely as being able to control or regulate the media, there were, at that time, all through the 80s and late 70s, demonstrations, and there was an actual protest to prevent this. But over the years, the governments, having realized that imposition of censorship is not something that can happen so easily, learned to control and censor the media from within by bringing in the big money. So now when money is so big, and where the corporates actually control the flow of information insofar as big television and big newspapers is concerned, then you realize that we ourselves are censoring the news. We don't have the professional editors anymore. Some of the major newspapers and television channels that we've already spoken about, criminals heading television channels. And it has become such a lucrative enterprise that the corporates now select their own person, put him or her at the head, and actually censor news on a daily basis. It is not that the news is not being covered by the working journalists, but it is not being aired. There are any number of events, I don't want to go into specifics here, but all of us know, big meetings, big news, what we would have called very big news, being blacked out by the powerful medium as a result of this kind of censorship. And instead, what you get and what the media gets is then perks, privileges, they become event managers, glamour, celebrities, you become stars, and basically the media industry rides on this. and no longer is riding on what is or is responding to what we think is extremely important, which is the Constitution of India, which is the law, which are the people should be the yardstick. The government becomes the yardstick, and never have we been more docile or more subservient than we are today. So we moved away, and the signals were visible. They were visible, but many of us did not react in the manner that we should have, or when we did, we were not able to go very far on that. It was moved away. We moved away from the rural to the urban. We moved away from the farmer to the industrialist. We moved away from issues to sensationalism. And in the past few years, almost entirely, we have moved to personality cults, personality politics, laced with what you call the other, with the stereotyping. We have actually taken part in what you call morphing videos, twisting facts, hiding the truth, and creating the other, and thereby, in that process, denying the diversity and pluralism of India, which actually is the mainstay of the democracy, which alone can then ensure a free and vibrant media, and a media that is responsive to the people and not responsive to governments. We moved away from the constitutions, we have moved away from the rights and equalities, and we have also, as the media, started practicing exclusionary politics, or covering or creating the exclusive zones when we write and when we report. So I think, and we really have in the process, we have acquired what you would say is the character of the corporate. We are now CEOs, we are not professional journalists. We live and we earn like the corporates, and we have been unable then to connect with the people and able to report what the people feel or experience, or what the experience is on the ground. So in the process, the biggest casualty has become journalistic ethics and accountability, and of course our responsibilities, especially when television anchors and channels preach war instead of peace, where they talk of the rich instead of the poor, when we talk of a nationalism that is macho and that is aggressive, rather than talk of inclusive politics, where we talk of, again, classes where we don't have the poor and where we don't have the poor castes, and we actually contribute to an environment which then marginalizes sections. So I think it's a very, very rough haul. We ourselves have been discussing this over and over again as to what can be done and how can we reform, how can this whole thing change. I mean, recently the Citizen, we gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to a Hindi journalist from Faizabad, Sheetla Singh. He had started a cooperative owned by journalists in 1956, as early or as late as that. And that cooperative is still continuing. It is still wedded to the ground. It has taken various positions across. I don't know whether because money is something which we don't have, and whether we are able to cut across the use of money power through cooperatives. Of course, the internet, and this is my last point, the internet is a revolution, but internet has come with challenges, and it has also come with the plus points. I mean, for internet papers like ours, sites like ours, news sites like ours, it is cheaper, it is affordable, it is something that you can do when you cannot bring out hard print, and of course you cannot start a channel. But there is no model of revenue. It's extremely difficult then to sustain, because you have to have contributors, you have to grow, and you have to move with the times. But at the same time, it is an amazing, amazing medium. If you move away from the rubbish that's on it and go into all the serious stuff that is on it, it's young, it has a language that is of youth, it is read by the under 35, it is something that moves with the young people of the country and of the world, and it connects nations, it connects people, it creates a commons, it gets people together. So if you can use it like that, it becomes an amazing weapon and a tool for democracy. I'll end here and hope for more questions. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ms. Meeta Deepak. She's the news editor, South Asia, from the Associated Press Television. In this capacity, she is responsible for managerial and editorial coordination in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives. A trained broadcast journalist, she began her career as a correspondent with Doordarshan. She started working for the AP soon after TV operations began in India and took over as head of AP TV in 2002, except for a short stint with the CNN South Asia and hosting a 100-episode TV chart show on Home TV. She has been with the AP covering and coordinating all the major news stories in the region. She is a graduate in economics from Delhi St. Stephen College and holds a master's degree from Delhi School of Economics.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening. We as journalists, I think, need to speak less and listen more. That is not to say that we should not speak up when we are asked to shut up or shut down. But if you look at what is going on in the media these days, I think it's a good lesson we have all learned in trying to understand that we need to listen more. So I'll try and be short. I will not, some of the points my fellow speakers have raised, were some of the points, and as you would agree, the concerns are common, the problem is universal. So I'll try not to repeat some of that. When Suruchi called me to come and participate in this, I did tell her that I technically don't belong to the Indian media. I work for an international agency. But having said that, as Seema said, as Paranjoy said, I think a lot of what we are seeing today is universal. I think journalists across the world, media companies across the world are facing similar issues. So there is a commonality, there is if the concerns are similar, the solutions may be similar too. So to that extent, I will try and speak of my own experience as an international journalist and how we try and counter, as the topic says, the unethical sort of behavior of media, and how we're trying to deal with some of the issues this new age of digital journalism has raised. So we are clearly facing a crisis. As I said, no two opinions on that. I don't think anyone disagrees. Public trust in media is low and it's continuing to fall. And again, this is a universal phenomenon across the world. Our credibility, journalists' credibility is being questioned. And there is a strong public perception of media as tainted, or biased, or unfair. Some of the issues, some of the, sort of reflections of this is paid media, as Murthy said, paid media, ownership of media by corporates, undercover sting operations which are, biased or with an agenda. Some of the surveys, like there was this recent survey by Pew, which is a very reputed company that looks at behavior. And they said, like in the United States, for instance, the latest survey conducted in 2016 shows that only 16% of Americans trust mainstream media. There were other studies which put the figure, worldwide to about 30. So we're looking at only 30% of people who are actually exposed to media believing what is being said. It's a very grave situation. If your audience or your viewers don't believe what you're saying anymore, in a democracy, it's serious. So it's time, and it's great that conversations like this are beginning to happen, because we do need to bring these issues to the fore and discuss. one of the reasons I think it's become far more complex is that the world has gone digital, that our profession itself is in a flux. You know, you have multi-format, multi-platform journalism, so there is a lot of, there is very little clarity in terms of how to regulate or how to manage a particular medium, because it's a constant, we are in transition, you know, it's a work in progress, and everyone is trying to make sense of how to deal with so many kinds of platforms, and so you have video, TV, text, radio, internet, interactives, data journalism. So it's all kind of, it's a big mix right now. And the way people are consuming news is of course changing too. Young people, nobody watches TV anymore. Nobody watches, it's all online. It's all internet. It's all instant. So the earlier system of old style journalists like us who've grown up, sort of verifying what we do, cross-checking facts, because you had time, there was no urgency of, filing at the minute something happens, is all gone for a six. Basically, you don't have time because the pressure of deadline is so much. And I think that kind of contributes to some of the problems that we are seeing in terms of, and I speak more from, I would not like to repeat, so I agree with pretty much, what both of them have said, but I'm trying to bring focus on what we can do as journalists to minimize our own sort of, not doing things right. There are no clear answers, but, I work for Associated Press. It's one of the oldest, biggest international news agencies. And we have put in place a lot of contractual obligations. So if you work for the AP, you have to sign 2 or 3 documents that lay out very clearly what you can or cannot do. And I think a lot of companies in India don't do that. When you hire a journalist, how many of you actually tell him or her that there are 10 things that you're not allowed to do? Whatever, under whatever circumstance, there are some things that you will not do because you need to be accurate, you need to be fair. These are standard journalism sort of teachings when you go to a journalism school. But when you actually start working as a journalist, there are few, places where they lay out a guideline structure for you and tell you that this is wrong. And there are some non-negotiables when you work as a journalist. In your mind, you should be clear that there are things that you will not do, come what may. And I was just telling Murthy that one of the things I find surprising is that there are so many journalism schools, but there are hardly any papers in ethics. Nobody tells journalists that this, you should not be doing these things. A lot of the curriculum in the universities is very old. It's a different world. You're living in a different landscape of the media. So you do need to move on, try and understand the complexity of what we are faced with, the contemporary sort of reality of the media landscape. And I think have a curriculum that deals with issues, because as a journalist, you face these dilemmas every day of a lot of the time, it's not really up to you. As Seema said, if your channel is owned by a big corporate, you will not be allowed to do a story against the owner. So given the wide understanding of, what is possible, even then, I believe it is possible as a journalist to have some, basic standards of integrity and honesty, and, to try and do things with as much, sort of truthfulness as possible in this age of post-truth, if there is any truth anymore, that is. Let me just read out a couple of things for you from the AP, what we sign as journalists, when we sign up, just for you to get an idea of things that we're required to commit to. So apart from the usual, that we will have our highest standards of integrity and ethical behavior when we gather and deliver news, that we will avoid inaccuracies, bias or distortions, and these are all written things that, so when I joined, I had to sign this, that we will not knowingly introduce false information into material intended for publication or broadcast, nor will we alter photo or image content. Quotations must be accurate and precise. We will strive to identify all the sources of our information. When try and avoid unnamed sources. I know it's not always possible, but again, one of the things that helps you, sort of sometimes make a decision of whether to file a story or not. Conflict of interest is a big part of what AP needs you to be aware of. So there is a separate document which says if you have a conflict of interest with actual conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest, you will not, do that story. And that includes small things like so as an AP journalist, I'm not allowed to go on a free trip. If a company or a public sector, sort of organization is taking people, even Ministry of Defense, we are supposed to offer to pay for our seat or not go on that trip. We're not allowed to accept gifts from anyone. And I think these are things that when you're working and you know that these are things that you absolutely cannot do, there is a line that, there is a bottom line for you as a journalist, that I will not be under any pressure. So no favors to be taken from anyone. It makes the job damn difficult sometimes because, you have to cultivate sources, you have to talk to people, you have to have access. All that, it doesn't matter. AP just will not allow you to do anything which is paid for. You have to pay for every single thing that you do and not accept anything, in return for a story or, anything. We don't pay for interviews. We don't, when we call people, to our studio or we go out and interview, we never ever pay to anyone we talk to. As a news gathering, as a professional journalist, it's just AP policy, no money for anyone you talk to. So I think it's a healthy, sort of, it's nice. It's nice that somebody has laid down these things. So the temptation to do some of, things that in the line of your work sometimes you're faced with, it's just easier because you know that as a professional journalist, these are things I will absolutely not do. Sometimes I don't want to read any more of this because if anyone interested, we can share some of our AP guidelines. One of the interesting examples of unethical journalism is the use of amateur videos or user-generated content. And, again, I don't want to go into details of, agenda or bias or, there's no verification. People in India, there is no concept of copyright. Videos are passed from one place to another. People run it. Nobody knows who's shot the video. Nobody knows who it belongs to. So AP doesn't allow you to do that either. If there is so for instance, we had this video of the Nigerians being beaten up. We didn't run it because the original source of that video would not give it to us in writing that we are allowed to use it. So it makes us non-competitive in many situations. Everybody else ran the video, AP didn't. But in a way, I'm glad we didn't. So we had to find other ways of telling the story. So we went and we spoke to the students and we, did whatever, got reactions, showed how bad this situation is, went and met the student who was in hospital. But we did not show that video because we were not sure who it belongs to. So these are things in the long run help you respect, the content creator. And I think as an international agency, of course, things are, you are allowed to sort of not do things. In India, for instance, if you're on one channel and they have something, the other channel doesn't really have the option. You have to get it. So, in a way, as a maybe we are better off, we can do without it. I'll just mention a couple of things that I think we can do to make, to move towards sort of discussing some of these issues. So a couple of just points. So there is this, just today only, when I was looking at things that are happening internationally, there is a coalition of funding agencies, academics, institutions, including Facebook, the Knight Foundation, and Mozilla. They've launched what they're calling a News Integrity Initiative. It's a $14 billion project, and the aim of this project is to restore trust in media. So it's a problem that they've actually, it has to be serious for it to get a $14 million funding, but so these conversations are beginning to happen because I think we've gone way beyond, not noticing it anymore. The other thing, I think, because a lot of news is now being shared on social media platforms, so Facebook, platforms actually have a very important role to play. And a lot of platforms need to be educated about the business of journalism because there is no public responsibility. Things go viral on the internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, on, Snapchat or whatever. But I think there is, and again, this is something that at least the international broadcasters and agencies are thinking of because a lot of them are publishing on these platforms. So there is this attempt to have conversations with these platforms as to how we can make it. So fake news is one of the things, like for instance, AP is running a project. It's one of the many companies, which is talking to Facebook and collaborating with Facebook to identify fake news. So AP will, if something in the news feed on Facebook comes across as possible fake news, then AP would offer its resources to fact check, and if it's fake news, then there would be. So soon, I think you will see, or maybe you've already started seeing, they're going to come out with a short tab which allows you to click on it and test whether one particular thing is fake news or not. And I think these are there are many things like that happening, but it's just one of the things I thought I'll mention because it is an attempt to make journalism, sort of get rid of some of these problems that we've acquired because of digitization. At another level, I think another discussion, I think students who are studying journalism, when you think of ethics, is ethics time and culture specific? So it's, I didn't get time to read. There was a paper online that I was trying to read, and it was talking about, is there a need for a national sort of code of media ethics? Should a country like India, with its complexity, with its diversity, can we afford to have something as uniform as a national media code? So it's something worth thinking about. I don't know whether it'll help or not, or how it would work, or what the potential of abuse would be. If you allow other people to regulate what you do, then there are obvious concerns about what it can do to you. And again, as I said, I strongly feel that we should have in journalism schools, I think it's time that there is strong emphasis on teaching those who are getting into the profession the need for understanding, what ethics are and what you should or should not be doing. So in the end, I will just say that as we try and make sense of this post-truth or post sort of fact words, I'd like to quote. So there's this Washington Post editor. His name is Martin Barron, and he said in a recent speech that alternative to facts is not alternative facts, it's fiction. So the most worrying part, I think, of this entire crisis that we are faced with is that unethical journalism is taking us into a world of alternative facts, where there is a constant barrage of misinformation that can alter public perception permanently. I mean, we had during American elections, and I'll just stop here, but just to, AP did a story just when Trump was leading when they were doing their primaries and Trump was leading. And the story went and spoke to Trump supporters as to why they would not see what was wrong, in his campaign, that, he was a misogynist, that he was, doing so many things wrong in his past and his present and the way he treated women. And the Trump supporters said, but that's not true. And I think the danger lies there that if you hammer misinformation for long enough and people want to believe it, then there is no way, even if you counter it with facts, it's going to be difficult to get them back. So I think we need our audience back to, appreciate what facts are, because facts should be sacred, but they're not anymore. So I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.